Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 13 of Vedic of the Value Added Ancient India from the purview of Civil Services Examination, Module 2, relating with Vedic Age. Today, in this module, we are going to deliver a lecture on the comparison of Vedic age, that is, later early Vedic age with the later Vedic age. The lecture will be delivered by Dr. Khwaja Danish Hamid, and he did his PhD from Jamia Millia Islamia. The topic of his PhD is Pashto Movement in Pakistan, Transformation, Origins, Development, 1957 to 1986. So, without wasting any further time, let me invite myself. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, to the chair. The topic on which on module 2 on which I will be speaking is the comparison between Vedic age and later Vedic period. The question which arises to our mind after listening to the topic is what is Vedic age, what was early Vedic age, and what was later Vedic. So coming to the point that what is Vedic age? See, during the period of 2000 to 1000 BCE, communities at different stages of cultural development were present in the regions of India. These these cultural their cultural and essential agro-pastoral understanding of these culture is based entirely on archaeological remains because of the exception of Harappan Harappan culture. None of these culture have been left behind or with any written records. So in this subunit, that is the Vedic comparison of Vedic age with later Vedic period, we are focusing on the evidence provided by the voluminous body of religious text, which are considered to be the earliest literary records of India. Uh, I will be also trying to supplement these evidences with wherever the relevant archaeological evidence is there. The Rig Veda is considered to be the earliest collection of hymns available, so we shall be examining the Rig Veda for understanding the what is early Vedic period, the definition of early Vedic period, and then go on to the Vedas and allied texts which are placed later. So first of all, the Vedas are though thought to have been composed of by the Aryans, and it was long believed that Aryans played a major role in civilizing the Indian subcontinent. The content of Rig Veda, if analyzed carefully, do not give the impression of a very advanced material culture. On the other hand, many of the material traits which are characteristic of Indian civilizations are already present in the non-Vedic archaeological culture in different parts of India. Now, when the contents of Rig Veda are compared with the later Vedas, that is the later Vedic ages, the text that originated in later Vedic ages, it becomes clear that significant changes took place in the Vedic society itself. This means that there is no fixed cultural patterns which can be called Vedic or Aryan culture. So basically, it's a satire on the I believe it's a satire on the historiography that is deeply influenced by the Weissman-Burden theory, and it is which is highly racist in nature. So the Aryan culture might be a figment of imagination or which existed in the minds of the British, or we can say the Europeans who were trying to understand the history of the Indian subcontinent, especially the Indologists and the Orientalists as well. So, the core geographic areas to which the evidence of Rig Veda relate is to Sub Sindhava, or the land of seven rivers. This would correspond with the whole of Punjab and its neighboring regions of Haryana. But Rigvedic geography also includes Gomal plains, southern Afghanistan, and southern Jammu and Kashmir. Earlier interpretations regarding early Vedic society are based on the theory of Indo-Aryan migration from West Asia into the Indian subcontinent. These migrants, who are regarded as author of Vedas, are called Vedic people. According to the historical interpretation, the Aryans came to India in several stages of waves. Uh, the Aryans are considered to be the representative of linguistic groups speaking into European languages. They are distinguished by traditional historians and archaeologists from non-Harappan, non-Aryan Harappan of preceding periods. However, in making certain observations on early Vedic society, it may be fruitful to see if the literary texts and archaeological evidences can supplement each other. If both types of sources are from the same region and the same period, then they together can give a more detailed idea on the economic, social, and political and religious life. The early Vedic period is marked by the inflation or interference of the Aryan peoples in the Indian subcontinent and their interaction with the Dravidian people. Aryan spread into Ganges River Valley about 1000 BC. About that time, they developed the use of iron tools and weapons. They used iron axes to clear forests for agriculture, and their agriculture practices flourished. Their population grew immensely. As the population grew, the political structure also got evolved. The local chiefdoms became kingdoms ruled by kings in permanent peace. These kings depended on the services of the professional administration to handle the day-to-day task of governance. Still, they did not establish large states. Only after 4th BCE did any Aryan state equal to the size of Harappan's cities society emerge. During the early Vedic age, the Aryans placed substantial reliance on sacrifice of animal to the gods. It is believed that during sacrifice, the god visited earth, joined worshippers in eating and drinking. Since the presence of gods was deemed beneficial, sacrifices became almost non-stop. A proper household would have the Brahmins and others sacrifices not less than 5 times per day, or process that was expensive and time consuming. In time, the practices grew old and the people disenchanted. A number of people began relating to woodlands to live as hermits and contemplate the relationship between people, the world, and the beings. A number of them were inspired by Dravidian practices. The Dravidian has worshipped spirits associated with fertility and the generation of new life. They had also believed that human souls took a new physical form after death, as either as another human or as plant or animal. The combination of Dravidian and Aryan religious ideas culminated in the Upanishad, literally sitting in front of, as student sits in front of masters to receive instruction. As group of religious works that appeared over time, the Upanishad taught that individual humans were in fact a part of greater universal soul known as Brahman. The Brahman was unchanged and universal, whereas human existence was a constant state of flux. The state the individual soul lived in cycle of reincarnation in which they would die and be reborn as another person, animal, or plant. In reincarnation, we know as karma, the cycle was not completely desirable as it involves a continuation of suffering, deaths to all human who are encountered this. The ultimate goal was to break the cycle and enter into permanent union with Brahma, soul, or sort of heavenly state. The teachings of Upanishads that was there in the end end stages, or also known as Vedanga or Vedantas. The teaching of Upanishad either purposely or inadvertently justified the caste system, as one in the higher caste was believed to have been a virtuous life in his previous existence, and vice versa. They spoke against gluttony, vice, materialism, and failure to consider one relationship with Brahman, and also encourage personal integrity. A healthy respect for all of living things, animal, human, was also encouraged. Even though animal represented souls who have suffered from the past, they would not be considered additional suffering. Therefore, a vegetarian diet became the norm for all who practice the religion. Well, a conclusion can also be taken that one can point out to many fundamental differences between the early and the later Vedic period. It would be appropriate to say that one of the most pressing differences is that of class and caste. The early Vedic period did not feature much of the way of social stratification. The lack of primacy based on these division in early Vedic society is noteworthy. All the divisions in society lived in relatively egalitarian status with one another. The emergence of differences in way of social superiority was something that came about in the later Vedic period. Not surprisingly, the later Vedic period featured less collective decision making and less of the emphasis is on the social inclusion of voice in the political and decision making. The later Vedic period, in the later Vedic period, the figure was a monarch as a figurehead and power broker became evident in the political setting of the time period. The reason for this are in large number, yet one of these have to be considered the growth of economies of scales in the later Vedic period. Trade and bartering became primary sources of material wealth and later Vedic period, which translated into emergence of higher and lower distinction in the society. So now we have to. Now I will say that we have entered another phase where it is initial. It is very essential for us to know what were the sources of these ages. See, there are two kinds of sources. One is archaeological source, and the other is literary source, on which we rely on studying the Vedic ages. So the literary sources among them are the four Vedas, that is Rig Veda, dedicated entirely to the early Vedic period, and the Sam, Yajur, and the Atharva Veda, dedicated to the later Vedic phases. Out of these, the Rig Veda is the earliest text. The word Veda is derived from the Sanskrit that is Ved, which means to know. The Vedas are essentially a compilation of prayers, hymns offered by different families of poets and the sages to uh, different gods. These four Vedas are also Samhitas in the sense they represent the oral tradition of time. Since the hymns were meant to recite, learn, and transmit orally, they were not written down when they were first composed. Due to this reason, none of the Samhitas can date precisely. Relative, relative dating in the terms of the context of these four Samhitas has led to believe the period represented in Rig Veda can be between 1500 BC to 1000 BC. The Rig Veda Samhita comprises of 10 books or the mandalas, of which two and seven are considered to be the earliest and belonging to specifically to the early Vedic phase. Books 1, 8, 9, and 10 are considered later addition to Samhitas. Scholars from Scholars found many similarities in the language used in Rigveda and Avesta, the old Iranian text, older to the Rig Veda. Because based on these linguistic similarities and taking into account the chronological precedence of Avesta over the Rig Veda, these scholars have suggested the following, which I am mentioning in front of you. The people represented in the book belong to a common linguistic group. They migrated from West Asia and Iran to Indian subcontinent. These people were called as Aryans. The Aryans had common original home because however, the debate regarding the original home of Aryan is no longer valid since the concept of racial identity of the Aryans have now proven to be false. Another glimpse of the racist mindset of the historians, colonial historians to be more specific and precise, who were predominantly working in this area. But the common linguistic identity is still believed by the historians, uh, and on the basis, some of them still insist upon theory of Aryan migration. So now the archaeological sources coming to them, literally sources we have covered now. Now coming to the second sources and the archaeological sources based on excavation. So the excavations conducted in Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, northern Rajasthan, along the Indus and Ghaggar River over the past 40 years have unearthed many Harappan Chalcolithic settlements from these regions. These have been dated from 1700 BC to 600 BC. The Chalcolithic cultures are also called late Harappan or orche colored pottery or BRW black and red ware pottery and PGW painted grey ware cultures. However, we must remember that pottery types do not reflect the entire culture of the people. Different pottery types to uh, different pottery type do not necessarily mean the people who use these pots also differ. Pottery analysis only helps in defining a specific traits of culture assemblage, nothing more than this. Some scholars have made attempts to examine whether the evidence provided by some of these culture of northwestern and northern India can be compared with what we know from the study of Vedic texts. What was another term that was coined in the later Vedic period is Sanskritization. With the sensitization is a process where a particular people from the lower classes or lower economic classes try to associate with the high culture that is predominantly dominated by the Brahmins. So these type of associations prove that there was a sort of hierarchy and there was a tendency among the lower classes to identify themselves with the higher class, people of the higher class. So the people from main strata of the society throughout the subcontinent tended to adopt their religious and social life to the Brahminic norms, a process sometimes called sensitization. If it is rooted in the tendency to identify local deities with the gods of the Sanskrit texts. The Kuru kingdom was the first state level society of the Vedic period, corresponding to the beginning of Iron Age in the northwestern India around 1200 to 800 BC, as well as the composition of the Atharva Ved, the first Indian text to mention iron as Samayas, literally means black metal. The Kurus state organized the Vedic things into collections and developed the orthodox Saruta or the ritual to uphold the social order. When the Kuru kingdom declined, the center of the Vedic culture shifted to the eastern neighborhood, the Panchala kingdom. The archaeological painted grave culture, which flourished in the Haryana and the western Uttar Pradesh region of northern India from about 1100 to 600 BC, is believed to be the correspond is believed to correspond to the Kurus and Panchalas kingdom during this period. During the late Vedic period, the kingdom of Vedic emerged as a new center of Vedic culture, uh, situated even farther to the east. It is now the Nepal and the Bihar state in India. The later part of this period corresponds to the consolidation of uh, increasingly large states and kingdoms called Mahajanapads all across northern India. So, Sanskrit epics, which is also a source of our knowledge about the Vedic ages, in addition to Vedas, the principal text of Hinduism, the, the core becomes Sanskrit epics. Ramayana and Mahabharata are said to have the ultimate origins during this period, that is the later Vedic period. The Mahabharata remains today the strongest single poem in the world. Historians formerly postulated an epic age as milieu of these two epic poems, but now recognize that the texts, which are both familiar and with each other, went through multiple stages of development over centuries. For instance, the Mahabharata may have been based on small scale conflict, possibly about 1000 BCE, which are eventually transformed into gigantic epic war by brats and poets. There is no conclusive proof from archaeology as to whether the specific events of the Mahabharatas have any historical basis. The existence of the texts of these epics are believed to belong to post-Vedic ages between 400 BCE to 400 CE. Some even attempted to date the events using methods of archaeoastronomy, which produced which have produced depending on which passage are shown and how they are interpreted. Estimate the dates ranging to mid second millennium BCE. Now, with the end of this later Vedic period, we see that the population have grown, have increasingly grown, and now the cultivation part of the now the cultivation now the cultivation was also on its boom. That the agrarian surplus was also increasing. Plus, the status of women was also sort of, they were being subjugated a lot, and there was a growth in administrative set of this era. That is, due to high population, we see that administration is evolving, and many Jalpads are now forming Mahajalpads. Many tribes or jati are forming many nations. And these nations are contributing and forming empire. Magad Empire is a classic case of this. The Aryan tribe soon started to pretend, penetrating the east, flourishing. along the Ganga and the Yamuna river. By 500 BC, the whole of northern India was civilized land where people had knowledge of iron implements and worked as labor, voluntarily or otherwise. The early political map of India comprised of copious independent states with fluid boundaries and increasingly population and abundance of wealth fueling disputes over these boundaries. Unified under the famous Gupta dynasty, the north of India touched the skies as far as administration and the Hindu religion was concerned. Little wonder then that is considered to be the India's golden age. By 600 BC, approximately 16 dynasty ruled North Indian plains. So you can imagine the boom of population due to agrarian surplus and due to livestock surplus as well. So spanning to the modern, these areas that included modern day Afghanistan to Bangladesh. Some of the most powerful of them of these dynasties were the Magad, Koshalas, Kurus, and Gandharas. Earliest historical evidences from Mehergarh, northwestern Indian subcontinent shows beginning of civilization at, in India at around 6500 BC. In the earliest and the largest urban site of this, it is the earliest and the largest urban site in this period. The has yielded evidences of earliest domestication of animals and evolution of agriculture as well as arts and art and craft. The horse was first domesticated here in 6500 BC. There is progressive process of domestication of animals, particularly cattle, and the development of agriculture, beginning with barley and later with rice, and the use of metal was seen in this case. With copper and culminating in iron, along with the development of villages and towns, it has been suggested by some of the historians that Aryan invasion of the subcontinent took place around 1500 to 1000 BC, depending upon the sources which we get from these places. So the archaeological data that is provided by the historians is of is leading us to the opinion that the initially it was when the population was not that much, the, the administrative system was not evolved. But during the later phases of the Vedic ages, we see that there's a development of Mahajanapads, and later these Mahajanapads contributing to Rashtra, and then Rashtra contributing to the empires, as is seen in the case of Magad. So let me take you back in order to get a bird's eye view that Indo-Aryans was a European invasion into South Asia at any time in the pre or proto-historic period, as per David Florey, was because of the exploit was because in order to amass the resources. So these tribes which are entering into India, they are looking for the resources, and these resources are in ample amount in India because India is the India in the southern part becomes a peninsula where there is sea and tremendous amount of water being found. So this water part, water being used as a resource and the land also being resource as a big resource helps any tribe which enters into Indian subcontinent as catalyzer, or you can say gives them a boost up to their population and helps them to rule even in the greater areas. Now, for ruling in the greater areas or building an empire, they need to have an elaborate system of administration. This system of administration is only possible when there is centralization. Though Some people say that this it was a decentralized polity, yes, but in economic, in the context and in the context of military, it was a centralized polity. Why? Because in those days there was no large standing army. The army had to be mobilized through the people. The peoples were asked to join in the fight against the either against the Dravidians or against the Aryans, as the case might be. And then they were uh, awarded with the loot, or you can say the loot they gathered from the defeated army or the subjugated army. Even we see in the case of the conflict which the Aryan had with Dravidian, that the many subjugated Dravidian tribes were surrendering their resources to the Aryans as form of gift in order to appease them and prevent them from being executed. So this is also a very important aspect. So later on, we see the development of sciences, especially the mathematics. They built large buildings, that is the Aryans, which were mathematically planned, especially when we look at the temples. City planning in those ancient times compared to the best modern cities. The civilization that the civilization had a written language and was highly sophisticated. Some of these towns had almost miles in diameters with thousands of residents in it. The ancient municipalities had granaries, citadels, and household toilets. So these kind of things were being also uh, propagated down south by the Aryans as well. In order to, it was a sort of a cultural intermingling, or you can say a process of assimilation where both the Dravidians and Aryans learned from each other, and this led to the creation of a homogeneous culture to a certain level where there was a amity between those people who are considered to be a martial race and those people who are considered to be predominantly peaceful and militarily backward, I would say. So uh, Saraswati region has been another area of interest, and David Foley, another modern scholar for this purpose, dates that around 6,500 to 3,100 BC was the pre-Harappan Rig Vedic period, and ni- uh, and around 900 to 1,000 BC it was the late Vedic and the Brahmana period. Now, with the caste system becoming extremely rigid, which was not the case during the early Vedic period, we see resentment among the masses. The resentment was led to the rise of Buddhism and led to the rise of Buddhism and Jainism. So Buddha, the subsequent sequence of development in literature, the sequence of development of literature does not parallel as migration into India, but historical development of civilization in India from Saraswati to Ganges has been recorded. In 5th century BC, Siddhartha Gautam founded the religion of Buddhism. Another phase, we see that there was a resentment against the caste system of the later Vedic phase. Buddha was the work on humanism still espoused much of the world. In the same other way, the Jainism was founded by Mahavira around 500 BC, when the Persian king Cyrus and Darius were pushing the empire eastward and conquered ever prized Indus Valley. The Persians were in turn conquered by the Greeks. under Alexander the Great, who came as far as Vyasa after defeating the King Porus and an army of 200 elephants in 326 BC. The tireless, charismatic conqueror wanted to extend his empire further eastward, but his own troops, undoubtedly exhausted, refused to continue. So Alexander returned home, leaving behind garrison to keep the trade routes open. Now the interaction with the Mauryas started. His although Indian accounts to larger extent ignored Alexander the Great in this campaign of 326 BC, Greek writers recorded the impression of general conditions prevailing in South Asia during this period. Two-day cultural fusion between several Indo-Greek, especially in art, architecture, and coinage, occurred in next several hundred years. Northern India political landscape was transformed by the emergence of Magadha in the East Indian Gangetic Plain. As extended over Hellenic sphere declined, a king known as Chandragupta swept back throughout the country from Magad, Bihar, and conquered his way till Afghanistan. This was the beginning of one of India's dynasty, the Mauryas. In 322 BC, Magad, under the rule of Chandragupta Maurya, began to assert his hegemony over neighboring areas. So, Chandragupta, who ruled 324 to 301 BC, was architect of first Indian imperial power, the Mauryan Empire, whose capital was Patliputra near modern-day Patna, that is in Bihar, situated on rich alluvial soil and mineral deposits, especially iron. Magad was at the center of bustling commerce and trade. The capital city of the magnificent places such as temples, libraries, gardens, parks are as reported by Megasthenes in the 3rd century BC, a Greek historian and ambassador to Mauryan court. Legend states that Chandragupta accessed was in the large measure to advise Kautilya, the Brahman author of Arthashastra. So we see that such type of empires are being evolved and developed. And later, Ashoka takes his empire to the greater heights. And there is a constant challenge to the later Vedic caste system and the class system by the faiths like Buddhism and Jainism. And the status of women in the society was also declining rapidly. So, previously in the early Vedic period, we see that many of the hermits were also women. Some of the women also compiled certain hymns of Rig Veda, but in the later phases, we see that it's completely absent. The presence of the women in the public spaces are declining rapidly, declining with leaps and bounds, and they are sort of completely mute during the later Vedic phase. So there is also development of science and technology during the later Vedic phase, and through this science and technology and developments of trade routes, we see many empires thriving during this later Vedic period. Many Janpadas converting to Mahajanapadas by the development of population, and big many of the big small economies converting into big economies. Why? Because there was a boost in population and also there was a increase in livestock at that time. So let me come to the conclusion at this period of this period. The- if we look at the status of women in the early Vedic society and compare it to later Vedic society, the status of women was not the same. Previously, it was of previously women were present in the in writing the hymns of Rig Veda or compiling it in some way. But now, in the later Vedic period, some of the historians believe that the condition of women was equivalent or to that of the Shudra, and they were completely absent from the public spaces. Public spaces were dominated by the males of higher caste, and the lower caste people were reduced to as taxpayers or as those people who are performing the sanitation job. The economy of the later Vedic phase was saw development of development of coinage system in traces. The late early Vedic period, the development of barter system was there, in which the banking system or the financial system was completely absent, and the cattle was supposed to be the major resource. Later Vedic period saw the resource, land being becoming a resource, and rivers also adding to the glory or adding to the sheen of these resources. Certain phases that are later than that of later Vedic period, we see that they are the water is exactly being used as a resource, and weaponization of dams by dam building on rivers lead and building of reservoirs for irrigation purposes also starts in order to inflict miseries and suffering on the opposing adversaries. Thirdly, and most primarily, differences during this early Vedic phase and the later Vedic phase was that of the Varna system. Varna system was initially in the Rig Vedic period or early Vedic period fluid category. Varna system can became a rigid category during the later Vedic phase with the increase in population. Early Vedic period, anyone can be of any class or any caste for that matter, and even the Shudras were also allowed to accumulate wealth. But the later Vedic phase saw a dramatic change, where the caste system became exceptionally rigid and untouchability was prevalent. So this was how the early Vedic phase was different from the later Vedic phase. And with this, we are coming to the end. So, with the permission of the chair, may I declare the question answer session open for this phase? Thank you to the chair. Yeah, are there any questions? So, thank you, viewers, for being with us for such a long time, and it's a exhaustive discussion by me. And today we have compared the early Vedic phase with the later Vedic phase, and we have also discussed about the condition of women in the society during early Vedic phase and later Vedic phase, and also discussed about how the change in quality was altered by the demographic shifts that is also inclusive of increase in population. So, with the permission of the chair, may I declare this session over? Thank you to the chair. With this, we come to the end of day 13 of Vedic ancient India and purview of civil services examination, and also your module 2. So, thank you, viewers. God bless you.